Hello, hello, hello. Thank you so much. So as a DJ, I'm gonna ask sometimes for a little bit of feedback, like hello, because I wanna feel it, you know? So thank you so much for the introduction. And just thank you for allowing me to share my work as an artist and an independent scholar in this space. And I wanted to personally thank Savvy Contemporary and specifically Bonaventure and Lima, who was here earlier, and Antonia and Lujan, especially for that introduction. Thank you so much. And to the Savvy for suggesting that I be a part of this event and this conversation. I've had the privilege of presenting my work at Savvy, and ever since then, I felt connected to the community. It's a community-oriented art space that they've created in Berlin, and I'm honored to be a part of the roster that of artists that they call on, so thank you so much. And finally, thank you to Stefan and Carolyn for preparing me for this event and taking me through logistics and the vision for the programming. And also just for being chill organizers. I appreciate the kind of ability to think on your feet. That's actually incredibly important to artists, so thank you so much. So I am a DJ, first and foremost, who was born and raised in Los Angeles, California in the 1980s. And which means that I grew up on hip hop culture, and as such, hip hop has been partially responsible for informing my critical consciousness and my political ideas, and because the culture itself offered a number of young people an opportunity to develop a range of transferable skills. So I gravitated towards the collection of music and performance, or rather the collection of music and the performance of the presentation of music, because that's what DJs do, right? We present music to the community, and in that presentation is a performance of knowledge, a performance of rhythm and timing, a performance of technical skills, a performance of an ability to read the crowd, and many other things that go into kind of conducting a party or composing a sort of orchestra of people on the dance floor. So I come here to you today to talk about how over the years I've developed this collection of music and this performance of the presentation of music into a methodology or an approach, which I call DJ scholarship. I coined the term DJ scholarship in 2013 to explain DJ culture as a mixed mode research practice that is subversive in its ability to shape and define social experiences, shifting the public perception of the role of a DJ from being a purveyor of party music to an archivist and an information specialist who assesses and collects, organizes, and provides access to music that DJs determine to have long-term value. So the title DJ in the truest sense of the art form implies decades for me and focused study that begin with first the ungendering of technological literacy, the production of non-traditional scholarship, radical interdisciplinarity, and historical recovery projects that honor the musical genealogies and intellectual traditions of Black women and queer people. My argument here is that DJs, alongside musicologists and cultural theorists and literary scholars and sociologists, are amongst those best equipped to decode and unlock messages found in what Mark Anthony Neal calls the hidden transcripts of Black music. But still missing from the discussions of music are the voices on the margins of acceptable scholarship within ethnomusicology programs and departments, particularly in the States. And also what's missing is the voices of organic intellectuals, to take Gramsci's phrasing, outside of the academy. So DJ scholarship, in the spirit of like autoethnography, exists on the line between the two. It's an academic endeavor rooted in personal narrative. So I'd like to share a quote that will help us kind of segue into the breakdown of DJ scholarship. And it's by Toni Morrison, who's actually one of my favorite writers and thinkers, and it's from her most recent collection of nonfiction essays titled The Source of Self-Regard. Are y'all with me? You weren't ready for that engagement. It's okay, I get it. We're gonna shake up how we kind of learn in this space. Thank you. So I may call on you to just say, I'm here, I'm present. Is that cool? Now we're here. So Toni states brilliantly that, quote, narrative is one of the ways in which knowledge is organized. Still, she says, narrative is not enough. So in my intellectual curiosity, I was sort of summoned by those last words, that narrative is not enough. And while for me, narrative is a primary vehicle, I am interested in theorizing my personal experiences and my family's history and different forms of cultural production, which is perfect because what I'm talking about is the whole life, right? Archives and reality. So that said, I'd like to move to a quick summary of DJ scholarship before we allow, or rather ask for, Mama Thornton to enter the room. So y'all with me? Cool. So there are 4 cultural practices that define DJ scholarship. The first is chasing samples. The second is digging through the crates. The third is studying album cover art review. And the fourth is reading liner notes. How many of you are familiar with what a liner note is? Oh, this is this is a reflection of the times, and so I want you all to know that this is what happened with the sort of evolution of, I guess 78 records to the MP3, right? Is that we lose a certain kind of intimacy with the actual album, right? But DJs are the sort of gatekeepers of maintaining those archives, those sonic archives that we call records, those ancient things, otherwise known as vinyl, right? And so what you would do in order to kind of figure out the personnel on an album, figure out maybe who the cover art was designed by, figure out who played the guitar in a particular song, figure out maybe the concept behind the album, maybe the social context, the cultural context, is that you would turn that album over or you would pull the sleeve out and you would read the story that would accompany the album, right? So liner notes did actually follow somewhat of the trend. There were liner notes that were a part of cassettes. There were liner notes that were a part of CDs. And believe it or not, when you buy an album, if people do that anymore, if you buy a whole album from iTunes or if you stream anything, particularly on iTunes, I'm not sure of what other kind of platforms are doing, but you could actually access the liner notes. Liner notes still exist, but very rarely are they referred to truly engage with the album on an intimate level. So I just wanted to give sort of like an extended definition of that, and I'll revisit liner notes, but I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. And so I'll walk you through each of the cultural practices so that you can have a fuller understanding of how I've arrived to where I am today and the kind of framework behind my scholarship. So, DJ scholarship, it's a sonic-based system of knowledge. I am DJ Lynnée Denise. Feel free to follow me at these platforms. I also have a website. But I want to start with the first actual cultural practice, which is chasing samples. Hip-hop as a repository or an genre. And what's interesting about hip-hop at the moment is that our relationship has changed. We were sort of in a toxic relationship, hip-hop and I, because of where it's going. It's a sad story, right? Is that there was a toxic relationship. There was some codependence because I understood where the music came from. I was a part of, to some degree, the energy that went into shaping the 1980s hip hop that kind of encouraged me to think critically, right? And then we've arrived at this new place where we have many new artists that have maybe one song, right? And that one song becomes available within seconds, depending on the platform that they use. And then the radio stations develop an interesting relationship with that song where they put it in rotation, and you hear that song possibly 100 times that week, that month, yeah? And then what happens is you come to a party, right, after you have been properly conditioned by that song, because 100 times is a lot of music to kind of remember and consume and to kind of form your body around. And so you come to the dance floor and you ask the DJ, can you play that song, right? So then the DJ becomes a person who is sort of responsible for product placement by music corporations, right? I am now responsible for playing that song that some of you may have become addicted to, and addicted to the familiar. Whereas the core job of a DJ is to expose the dance floor, to expose the community to new music, right? So that job has been thwarted by the state of the music industry. So I just wanted to kind of talk about the fact that while I use hip hop as an anchor, our relationship has changed dramatically. And not just because of that, also, hip hop is the core reason of why I now spend a lot of time listening to artists like Bjork, why I spend a lot of time listening to artists like Led Zeppelin or Bach, because that's what those DJs and producers were doing. They were digging through the crates and discovering music and introducing us through the sample to various genres of music. You all with me? So the first cultural practice is chasing samples. Sampling is the act of taking a portion or a sample or a pre-existing sound, recording, and repurposing or remixing in the creation of a new song. So during the 1980s, I began to take notice of the link between hip hop and the music my parents were listening to from their collection. And I learned that DJs and producers were using hip hop like a repository, like a container for multiple genres of music. So another DJ by the name of Shadow argues that hip hop is an omni-genre, observing that sampling is a conceptual approach towards sonic organization rather than a particular sound itself. DJ Spooky refers to sampling as a compositional strategy, a collection of found objects used to design the architecture of a song. So by chasing these samples, I developed language to articulate how the blues and funk and rock and soul and classical music and krautrock and punk and other forms of music became part of the overall body of the hip-hop sound. So I was being trained on how to have intergenerational and transnational conversations about what artist and critic Robert L. Douglas defines as aesthetics of multi-dominance in Black music. And by Black music in this sense, I do mean typically Black American music, although he frames it in diaspora. In other words, sampling is aligned with his argument that Black art, music included, generally speaking, involves the, quote, multiple uses of colors in intense degrees, or the multiple uses of textures, designs, patterns, or shapes, and that those are found routinely in musical and visual works of Africa and its diaspora, unquote. So sampling is an extension of the layering that Douglas speaks on. Chasing the sample can lead you to many places, like how it led me to Dusseldorf. Did I pronounce that correctly? Dusseldorf? I'm gonna be attempting to say a few German words, and I just ask you to support me as much as possible by not laughing, just by allowing me to work my way through it. So it led me to Dusseldorf, Germany, by way of the Bronx, right? There was a relationship between Dusseldorf and the Bronx, and actually between Dusseldorf and Detroit, and actually between Dusseldorf and Chicago, right? Does anyone know what that connection is? But never mind, I realize that it's right there in front of you. So, so craft work, right? So I'm gonna play a few samples for you all to kind of stretch this point. So the first, to discover that, how old was I? Let's just say I was about 8 years old when I discovered craft work. And then I was about maybe 15 years old when I discovered that they were almost like these white robots from Germany. I was like, hold on, like, how is that possible when I have spent 5 years of my life back spinning and head spinning to this sound? And it is because of the sample, right? So here's what I'd like to do. Let us actually play with this sample here. Let's see. You all with me? Yeah. Thank you. And hold on. Okay, hold on. And I'm curious, by a show of hands, how many of you listen to craft work? Okay, so okay. So I'm in the right place. Okay. So I will first play Africa Bambaataa, Planet Rock, which is a quintessential 1980s sort of hip-hop marker of a, not just hip-hop, and when I say hip-hop, I am talking about electronic music. And I am interested in the electronic music that was being developed in different parts of the country in the United States, not just in New York, but New York is one of those places. And so here's what we will do. So that sample became party people, party people, party people, party. Party people, can yo get funky? Sonic Force, can yo get funky? The Zulu Nation, can yo get funky? Yeah, just hit me. Just face the funk and hit me. Just get on down and hit me. That bot just getting so funky now, hit me. Were you all aware of the fact that techno music is largely based on Kraftwerk's sort of electronic approach to the? I'm trying to figure out who's in the room, and if that and if that's relevant to you. So yeah. So just to know again that this is a sound that was coming out of Europe, was a major way for me to travel, right, before having a passport, and a major way for me to then ask questions. Okay, so I am 9 years old and it's 1989 and there's a wall that's falling in Berlin. And those guys, Kraftwerk, are from that place. Let me tune in a different way, right? So in a lot of ways, we were in conversation. Another actual artist goes by the name of Egyptian Lover. He's from Los Angeles, California, and the sample is actually easier to get to in this space, and here it is. So are you guys familiar enough with the Kraftwerk song to know the actual song that's being sampled? Okay. Someone said yes? Okay. I don't want you to participate because I can tell you know, I know you know some things actually. All right. This is Kraftwerk's version of, or the original version rather. So what's important about that sample and the way that it traveled is I also want to make a connection. I'm going to do something that I rarely do, which is to just do a simple, basic sample of a dance move to show you how Germany shaped a particular kind of dance movement called pop locking. So this is what happened when we were listening to that music. Right? So, nice. Is that a, okay. A foghorn, that's amazing. So yeah, like, so all of that is about how, you know, music migration, how music travels, and how cultural production is informed and involved and engaged in a global conversation. So chasing samples doesn't stop at simply discovering which artist sampled whom. It's about refining your questions to dig deeper into the abyss of history and geography and culture. So the next slide. The next cultural practice of DJ scholarship is digging through the crates. And this is a primary place where DJs act as, or rather kind of embody the role as archivists. So the first place that I started chasing samples was in my parents' record collection, their personal archive, which was in fact my first encounter with an archive that would shape what I call my sonic liberation practice. So the literal meaning of digging through the crates describes the rigorous process by which a DJ discovers music. In fact, I'll play this. Discovers music in traditional and non-traditional spaces, right? Record stores, garage sales, flea markets, your parents' basements, your grandmother's basement, antique shops, swap meets, various places where we can kind of build on that collection. So digging in the crates is also a metaphor for identifying a rare item through an informed research process. So digging through the crates implies rigor informed by an investigative practice that should inspire compelling questions. So this video you're watching was filmed in the Netherlands. I traveled to a city called Nijmegen in the Netherlands, where Nina Simone lived in the 1980s. And while visiting this place, I discovered a record store, which I consider to be an archival site. And in that store was her collection. And in that shop was the record owner, himself a music scholar by default, who shares stories about her presence in that town. I've also traveled to Carry-les-Rochers and Bouc-Bel-Air. Please don't just work with me with my French. In the south of France, the place that she lived before she died, and the place that Nina Simone called home. And I went there with questions and to pay tribute to the ghost of her resistance. And to build on the notion of ghost and haunting in the archive, I want to bring Saidiya Hartman's work, her archival work in particular, into the discussion because she talks about the weight, the emotional impact of digging through the crates or navigating any other institution of memory where you encounter fragmented parts of these larger stories. And so Hartman states that to read the archive is to enter a mortuary, since it reproduces the social death of certain subjects through the erasure of interior desires, beliefs, sentiments, thoughts, and pathways, relegating them to objects of torture, annotations on a ledger. And so I took that idea of I've always been curious about what makes someone like Prince work. What is it that made it impossible for him to sleep at night and that created such a significant body of music that the moment it was discovered that he passed, one of the first things that happened after the body left the property was that they entered this vault where his music that had been produced for decades was living, right? And they are releasing that music through not social media, but through streaming platforms such as Spotify and Tidal, right? So I have mixed emotions about that because I was interested in the interior life of Prince. I was interested in why he did not want everyone to have access. I was interested in why, when he was alive, it was damn near impossible to find a live performance of him on YouTube. It was nearly impossible to find Prince albums on Spotify, right? So I am curious about that, and that leads me to questions about what it meant to grow up in Minneapolis, what it meant to kind of identify, whether he did directly or not, as a sort of gender non-conforming creature and beast. And so those things kind of helped me understand the music more, but also, again, helped me kind of think about a geographical consciousness, right? One thing that he said that he never wanted to do was leave Minneapolis. He said it was so cold that it kept the bad people away, right? But he also appeared throughout the 90s of wearing the word slave on his face. And he also battled the Warner Brothers record company to kind of have ownership of his masters, right? So there's a deeper story, and I am interested in Prince beyond being entertained by him. I am interested in Nina Simone beyond her kind of sensationalized kind of story around her mental health issues. I am much more interested in a conversation about socially induced depression. And so that is why I ended up in the south of France. So for my work, Digging Through the Crates is a local endeavor and a means to understand a kind of global citizenship and also understand expatriation. And in the case of Nina Simone, but also hundreds of other artists like James Baldwin, Josephine Baker, so many others who kind of escaped from a racialized experience that defines the core values of American culture. So I'm not just listening to Nina Simone for entertainment, I'm listening to her movement and I'm trying to understand the reasons behind her migration. So a practice of digging through the crates allows me to form these larger questions and to kind of put together these pieces of history that are scattered throughout the sonic archives. Are y'all with me? Okay. So the third cultural practice is studying cover album art. And, you know, album covers provide a way for us to track the visual history of music. And I developed an intimate relationship with each album that I owned. I studied all aspects, as I mentioned, and over the years, I realized that albums offered an alternative visual story of Black American life. And so album cover art was affirming to me as being a little Black girl growing up, looking for reflections that encouraged healthy ideas about beauty and that taught me how to question European standards of beauty, the kind that lead to plastic surgery, the kinds that lead to skin bleaching, the kind that leads to perms. And so seeing those images in my parents' collection, images of me, images of people with natural hair, images of people with dark skin, even images of white people with long hair, which was also something that was sort of marginalized. So looking at the Beatles and looking at, you know, Frank Zappa, like, what an interesting character, you know, and just kind of thinking about different forms of beauty across the board. And so the albums my parents had and the ones I began to collect raised questions about self-determination and representation. They also gestured toward rebellion and radical expressions of individuality and various forms of community, and they offered a way to kind of resist cultural misinformation. So as a collector, it became clear to me that I was developing a certain kind of visual literacy, and that this literacy offered me the analytical lens I needed to understand larger questions involving the visual arts. And so the studying of the album covers put me in conversation with artists like Ernie Barnes and Carol Walker and Carrie Mae Weems and Carrie James Marshall, Salvador Dali, Frida Kahlo, and Getche Mutu, right? And it developed my eye. And so album cover art can be like an alternative visuality structure, and they can offer other ways to be seen or another way to see. And so the fourth and final cultural practice is called reading liner notes, and I've told you all a little bit about kind of what that means in the context of this work. And so the foundation of my engagement of music as a cultural practice worthy of scholarly review began with reading liner notes. So DJs have been engaged in an informal ethnomusicological research practice by default. And inherent to DJ culture is this intensive study of music and regional scholarship to help us understand genre. Like if you say Chicago, I'll say house music. If you say St. Louis, I'll say blues, right? If you say London, I'll say UK soul, breakbeat, garage. If you say Los Angeles, I'll say cool jazz movement. If you say New Jersey, I'll think about Parliament, right? So there are different ways that I understand place based on music. And to kind of understand the social conditions that oftentimes produce the songs and the sound of the music. And so liner notes are the written text or the story about the music that typically accompany the album. And so the thing that reading liner notes allowed me to do is to take reading more seriously. So I moved from reading liner notes to reading album reviews. I moved from reading album reviews to reading biographies. I moved from reading biography to reading critical kind of music, race, and queer theory, reading about intersectionality, reading to understand and to have a sociological lens on my understanding of music. And also reading to think about and to learn about who has been historically responsible for shaping the stories of Black musicians globally, right? And so I found a discrepancy there where so many of the biographies, so many of the stories have been told from voices outside of the community, and in doing so, there's been a kind of dangerous level of the absence of nuance in understanding their lives. So you're seeing here some of the most influential books that have kind of shaped my ideas around this approach, and some of the writers and the thinkers that I like to have in the room with me when I'm presenting my work, and to kind of shape and guide my hand and to kind of place myself in these genealogies and to become a part of a lineage of critical thinking around music. And so this is what DJ scholarship looks like in the form of a graph and in practice, right? Is that to collect and assess the music, which is the digging through the crates and the sampling, the scholarly analysis that comes from the kind of critical visual analysis and the liner notes and the critical engagement of reading. And in thinking about this theoretical framework, I am a major student of a scholar. He's no longer with us, but he wrote an incredible book called Development Arrested. His name is Clyde Woods, and he introduced me to this concept of a blues epistemology. And that helped me to understand Black music as a form of social explanation, and also Black music as a form of alternative history. So I had a different experience with the history books that were used in American classrooms when I listened to, the music of Jimi Hendrix, who kind of taught me to think about whether or not the Vietnam War was necessary, and to have me think about the way that Vietnamese people were represented in American media. Right? Or I had the opportunity to engage Islam through the number of jazz musicians who converted to Islam during the 1960s, which made it possible for me to not fall victim to the kind of Islamophobic rhetoric that, is sort of defining global dialogue today. And so those are examples of Black music as social explanation. And then, as I mentioned, regional and interdisciplinary scholarship. And so I am very much so interested in thinking about place and music and sound and time and kind of thinking about what it means to score my understanding of music, and what it means to be a part of a certain kind of, transnational conversation about music. And then narrative shifts and historical revisioning is about what I have decided to do with this information, which is to write about those things that I'm interested in, to present on what I'm interested in. I'm actually a college university professor, and I bring these stories and these questions into the classroom as a part of this work. I consider myself to be a witness. This is something that James Baldwin has charged us to do as artists, as thinkers, as organizers, is to witness what it is that you are part of, and to figure out where to kind of detach yourself, where to jump in, and to testify with whatever your artistic practice is, to witness and to testify. And then finally, erase your resistance, right? This idea that Black people are here solely for entertainment. And what I mean by erasure resistance, I mean to dig into their interior lives and to ask deeper questions about how it was possible that Aretha Franklin outlived Michael Jackson and Prince, right? And Tupac. Like how it was possible that she outlived David Bowie and George Michael. But then asking deeper questions about what does it mean that she died of pancreatic cancer? What kinds of stories was she holding in her belly? What is the story of Detroit? And how did the poverty there impact the way that she engaged food, the way that she engaged love, right? And so those questions are important to me if I feel like I really want to understand who Aretha Franklin was. So that is a kind of introduction, a summary of DJ scholarship. Are you all with me? Do you understand? Okay. And you guys understand what I mean by DJ scholarship? And you understand it as a tool that could help you dig deeper into these questions that you may not have had prior to this moment, right? So I want you to ask, is there a relationship between how damn cold it is in Iceland and how high Bjork's voice can go? Like, those are the kinds of questions, that I want to get at. So, thank you. So, I want to talk about my latest work. It's a multimedia project drawing from multiple sources, multiple archives, but the primary one being a very unpopular one. I would even argue it's a contentious site of investigation for archivists, which is oral history. So there are questions about where oral history belongs in the organization of the archives. And in fact, the archivist and scholar Ron Felipe defended the use of oral history of archives as a legitimate place of inquiry in his seminal text, Oral History and the Archives. And he responds to the debate with healthy confusion, stating that, quote, as an archivist who has participated actively in an oral history program and who is presently responsible for administering the results of that program, I must confess to some bewilderment over the intensity of the debate. What indeed is all the fuss about? It seems to me that while oral history requires some modifications of standard archival management, it is simply another kind of material to administer along with manuscripts, photographs, tapes, films, prints, and other materials, and who knows what else, he says. Indeed, oral history is easier to deal with than many of the others. I just thought that he was an interesting old bloke. And so I think that that's an important question that he raises, and he definitely affirmed the work that I am doing with a figure who became such an epic presence in my life, and her name is Willie Mae, also known as Big Mama Thornton. Are you all familiar with Willie Mae, Big Mama Thornton, by any chance? Okay, so we're gonna actually learn about some details about her life and kind of figure out where we are. How am I doing on time? You all? Okay. So this project, through the application of chasing samples and digging through the crates, I found a rare 15-minute interview of Willie Mae Thornton. I've chopped it down to 8 minutes. And the interview is actually with German-born, American-based founder of Our Holy Records, and his name is Chris Straswitz. I'm just gonna call him Chris. And Chris took an interest, Chris took an interest in the personal stories and will record extensive interviews with the artists that he signed on Our Holy Records. So the 15-minute interview is one of the most extensive interviews on Willie Mae's life. I have traveled to multiple archives, the Schomburg Center in Harlem, New York, to the Black Music Archives in Chicago, and there is such a limited amount of information on this woman's life. She is typically kind of mentioned on the margins of other larger artists that she had a long-term career with, like Muddy Waters. She played with Muddy Waters for multiple decades, but her story is nearly impossible to find, and so I was actually recently approached by a university of Texas Press, to write a book about Prince as a part of a small series called Music Matters. And I have no idea of what made me say this, but I said, no thanks. I would rather write about Big Mama Thornton. even though I knew that there was hardly any information about her. So, so this is important. This interview is important for several reasons. First, she gets to tell her own story, which is something that Black American artists have been denied strategically, structurally denied the opportunity to tell their stories. And she died poor, which lets you know the kind of state of her career towards the end of her life. And as you can imagine, the kind of lack of control that she had over things like the masters or questions around publishing rights. So this project that I've done, this small kind of 7-minute almost remix of the interview is put together with music that I've composed, and I've kind of dug through the proverbial digital crates to look for flyers and album covers and photos that support what she's saying, and then you realize that she indeed is an oral historian that allows me to kind of build an archive around this story. So, you know, I could face legal challenges if I really tried to use this work in a kind of commercial space, but similarly to sampling, this is a subversive act. It's to not necessarily avoid citing your sources, but to resist and to intentionally refuse to associate or to identify typically the white owners of Black music as the kind of gatekeepers of these sounds. And so I have indeed sampled without permission. So, and I will continue to do so. But, so I did sign the book deal, and I will not be able to sample without permission there, but I can definitely bring this work to you in a way that I hope inspires curiosity. The second thing that I want to acknowledge is that there is one biography available on her life, written by a German man by the name of Michael Spork, I believe is his last name, who lives in Dusseldorf, Germany. And interestingly enough, I read that book, that one book. There is one book on this woman's life, and that's a crime. But it's okay. So I read the book, and I discovered that I would be in Germany with Savvy. And so I reached out to him, which I thought was absurd, and he responded, which was absurd. And so we together in this kind of integrated absurdity decided to meet up in Dusseldorf, Germany. So I jumped on a train from Berlin to Dusseldorf, and I let him know that I was in the train station. And he said something interesting to me. He said, okay, we should be able to recognize each other. You will probably be the only Black person, and I will probably be the only person in a wheelchair. And I was like, wow, right? Because wow. Now, wow, because of the tenderness that he wrote about this woman's life, that it made me jump on a train to go to a place that I'd only heard of in Pippi Longstocking movies, right? Dusseldorf was not on my destination, you know what I mean? It wasn't on my bucket list. Like, I wasn't like, Jamaica, Dusseldorf, you know, like it was a different, it was a different experience that I had with the words. And so I met him, I met him there, and he was incredible. And he took me to his house, and I filmed him, and I asked him all the questions. You can imagine I was already excited that there was this one book written about her, and I asked him all of the questions I could, and he was super generous. And it just occurred to me, first of all, it was just a racially healing moment, you know, where it's like you actually do get to transcend race in certain private spaces, not structurally, but certainly on a one-to-one human level. And what was incredibly tender about that moment is that he had a certain kind of urgency to get home, and I trusted him. I was gonna go to his home with him. This is a man that I only knew through his work. And I went to his home, and I discovered that the urgency was about the fact that he and his wife are both wheelchair bound, and he needed to get home to feed her, right? So I bring up his kind of physical condition, his, as he calls it, disability. He's a disability activist, because it helped us to kind of understand the ways in which Big Mama Thornton has been demonized and even criminalized, and I could tell that with his level of care that he was invested. And so that said, I decided to publish the book. It will be coming out around this time next year, so please look for a book called Why Big Mama Thornton Matters by DJ Lynnée Denise. So I am going to actually just end with this 8-minute sort of montage showing that this is a sort of a archive that draws from an unexplored history. And Big Mama Thornton's story is a story about place and time and music and movements and migration and gender, nonconformity, and most importantly, blues epistemology. So we could get started with the film. Also, can you guys give a round of applause to the AV people because they've been incredible and incredible. Where you start that from the beginning? Sorry.
An Alabama kid. Well, my father, he was a minister. My mother, she's a Christian-hearted working. The 11th of December. An Alabama kid. Well, my father, he was a minister. My mother, she's a Christian-hearted working woman. She sang Christian songs. I used to go to church a lot, but just singing, you know, I didn't do too much singing in church. No, I lived with a show, the Sam Green's Hot Harlem Review out of Atlanta, Georgia. Well, I did audition on this show when they was playing a little theater there in the hometown. Well, we went Atlanta, Birmingham, and back home, and Columbus, Georgia, Macon, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida. We just toured practically everywhere. Well, I started before the war, and then after the war broke out, then we went to touring through Texas, playing in theaters. Dancers, chorus, comedians, singers.
How long did you stay with them?
Well, up until 48, that's when I left in Houston. I quit the show in Houston, Texas. Well, in Houston, I started recording records for Don Roby before I recorded from him, but he came out to the club I was working called the El Dorado Ballroom there on the Elgin and Darling to hear me sing. And right then, he wanted me under contract, but I didn't find right then. I was playing with a group called Smiley. He had Ike Smalley. He was the band leader there at the El Dorado. That was his band. And then after he left, another band came in, Pluma Davis and his rock. We called them the House Rockers, and they were doing pretty nice. Well, Gatemouth Brown, he was real hot there. He was on Peacock label. And Roy Brown, he was in town. He was pretty hot around in that length of time. And I got a chance to meet Louis Jordan when he come to town. Big Joe Turner. Fats Domino, he was working around. That's when he put out this record. They called me the Fat Man.
How long did you stay around Houston?
Well, in 51, I cut this record, Let Your Tears Fall, Baby. And I went to San Antonio, and I worked down there. I worked in San Antonio for a while. And when I came back, I was working around Houston, different little nightclubs. And Johnny Otis, he came to town. That was in 52. So we did an audition on his show that night when I was working with Gates Miles Brown. He wanted me to sing with his band. So I did a song with his band. And he liked the way I performed on the stage, so he hired me. So he took me on tour, New York. And that's when I first went to the Apollo Theater in 52. Well, we left Houston and we went to Los Angeles. And while I was there, we recorded Hound Dog, but Don Roby put it on the shelf.
What about Elvis? He give you anything for Hound Dog?
I never got a dime. You ain't nothing but a hound. When Snoopy round the door. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. When Snoopy round the door. You can wag your tail, but I ain't gonna be you no more. Oh, you like that, but I can see through that. Yeah, you know me what I can, but I can see through that. And Daddy, I know you ain't no real cool cat. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. When Snoopy round the door. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. When Snoopy round the door. You can wag your tail, but I ain't gonna be like you no more. Oh, really? Oh, make it feel so. Oh, do the twist. Oh, get it. You made me feel so blue. You made me weep and moan. You made me feel so blue. You made me weep and moan. You ain't looking for a woman. Why you looking at his phone? You ain't nothing but a hound dog. When Snoopy round the door. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. When Snoopy round the door. You can wag your tail, but I ain't gonna be you no more. And bow wow to you too.
So that's that. Thank you. I'm gonna actually let Willie Mae Thornton have the last word because I want you all to understand that at the roots of rock and roll is blues music, and just the number of blues musicians that did not get their due. Willie Mae was, she died in Los Angeles, California in 1984. She died without family members around her. She died poor in an unmarked grave. So while Elvis went on to and continues to experience financial success, I just want us to kind of think about who is under the foot of that success. So, in her own words.
She died in 1984. She died without family members around her. She died poor in an unmarked grave. So while Elvis went on to and continues to experience financial success, I just want us to kind of think about who is under the foot of that success. So in her own words.
Is it? Oh, hold on one second.
Tell us about Hound Dog. Everybody knows Hound Dog, and very, very few people know about it. How did it all start? What happened?
While I was cutting a record called my man called me this morning, and I cut another number called Let Your Tears Fall, Baby. While I was in the studio, at Hollywood Studio, Jerry Lever and Michael Strollin came in with it on a piece of paper bag. And so I had already cut what I had cut. So they said, hey, can you sing this? I said, I don't know. So I just picked it up and looked at it. As I say right today, God bless the dead, Pete Lewis, the fellow was playing guitar, he's passed on. And I was just hollering, you ain't nothing but a hound dog. And he started playing, and this amplifier went haywire. So now they got to hook him up direct. So he had on his ear mufflers and everything. They took one take of it, and that was it. The big hit of 1953 when they released it.
What about Elvis? He give you anything for Hound Dog?
I never got a dime.
You mean you didn't even get a box of Geritol?
I didn't even get a box of nothing.
You ever say hello to you?
Yeah, did he tip his hat? Did he do something?
Well, he refused to play with me when he first come out and got famous. They wanted a big thing for Big Mama Thornton and Elvis Presley. He refused. And I'm so glad I can tell the world about it.
So thank you so much. Oh, are there any questions? Am I supposed to? Any questions? Not a single question. Well, I have a question. So how many of you were familiar with the fact that she was the person who sang the song Hound Dog first? Okay, so very few. And then the rest of you assumed that it was Elvis Presley's song, yeah? How many of you are familiar with the song Hound Dog? Oh, and how about not? How many of you are unfamiliar with the song Hound Dog? You've managed to this is sort of a blessing if you've managed to escape it. Okay. So any other questions? That was my only question. Okay. Well, thank you so much. You've been an incredible audience, and I appreciate you listening and giving me the time. Thank you so much.